I would like to invite a presentation from the Christchurch branch of the National Council of Women on the Women Voices project, and thank you very much for agreeing to come in and make this presentation. It's been good having a committee of the whole council where different groups can present as a group, and we welcome you here. I think we've set aside, how long have we set aside for this presentation? I have it noted somewhere. No. How long have we set aside for the presentation? 20. We've set aside 20 minutes for the presentation, so thank you very much. Welcome. If you'd like to introduce everyone, I know you, Liz, and I don't know whether...
Kia ora, katoa. Good morning, and good morning, Madam Mayor and City Councillors, and thank you for the opportunity to present the National Council of Women's Voices Earthquake Stories. The Research Committee here, Rosemary Duplessis, Liz Gordon, myself, Judith Sutherland and Helen Gibson.
Kia ora. Kia
ora. The project grew out of the desire of the membership to ensure that women's voices were documented and heard. There were many members who volunteered their work for this project, and that is greatly appreciated. The Christchurch City Council was the principal sponsor for the Women's Voices Stage 1, and we do appreciate this, and this is giving back to you, we hope. The Lotteries Commission funded Stage 2 of the Women's Unheard Voices, and this continued through 2013. The extension of the project was to capture the experience of women whose life circumstances were particularly difficult and difficult to contact. To date, we have installed on UC Seismic over 100 interviews and transcripts, audio recordings, photos and some videos. And here we have the UC Seismic quake site, and I hope you'll all dip into it.
On the UC Seismic site, you can read lots of individual women's stories. You can listen to some audio recordings of their interviews, and you can sometimes see photographs of them and sometimes videos. We've been making some of the links across those stories to look at some of the themes and some of the issues that emerge. One on the most recent stage of the project, and we're currently working at integrating information. We will produce a final report at the end of this month. We've also been sharing that information in a variety of funded us. We will tell you a bit about what came out of that study. And we're also then focused on thinking of digging deeper in the next 6 to 8 months in terms of what are the policy implications of the stories that we've encountered as we look at women across different parts of the city, different ages, different life circumstances, different socioeconomic conditions. We're also interested in writing academic articles, we're thinking about a book project, and we're interested in a forum towards the end of the year where we might bring together some of the people who participated in our study and some of the people who are decision makers and those active in the community in terms of response to this earthquake.
We're now going to present you some aspects of the project to give you a flavour of the women's voices. The first area we want to cover is the fear of tsunami in the eastern suburbs. It led to many people evacuating New Brighton after a September earthquake, like Caroline.
I told myself, you have 5 minutes. I got Rico, my dog, and without stopping, got in the car and tore off. I reckon I was the first person out of Brighton. The road appeared wet, then dry, then wet. I slowed down. There might be power lines. I might get electrocuted.
Other women went outside and saw cars going past. Did these others know something? Should they evacuate too? Nikki, with her terrified, sick and autistic son, somehow got him and his medications in the car and left. Alia, an Afghan refugee, remembers.
I thought we are near the beach in New Brighton, and I wanted to save my children from the water. I thought there may be another earthquake that came from the sea.
She and her family and other Afghan refugees spent the whole day in the Kashmir hills without information or help. Karen also fled through the darkened streets.
There were just people driving everywhere. It was pitch black and some of the people had forgotten to put their headlights on. So you were driving into the darkness and cars would suddenly be there. It was just frightening.
Others also left or tried to. With the roads covered in liquefaction and full of potholes, fleeing was dangerous, but perhaps not as dangerous as staying. Some people found their cars stuck by falling walls or jammed in the garage. Where could they find information about the risk of a tsunami? When it comes to tsunami, education, knowledge and good information are the antidotes to fear and flight, especially for potentially vulnerable populations such as refugees and the sick and elderly. Not so all are as blasé as octogenarian Helen, who thought the earthquakes were like living through the London Blitz and said, if your number's up. The next topic we want to cover is community services.
We interviewed many women who were at the forefront of the Student Volunteer Army, the Farming Army, and numerous other initiatives. For example, Jane Rattray, Rangiora Earthquake Express, had access to a helicopter, a pilot, and wanted to fly in fluid. She hit some official snags.
My first call on Thursday morning after the February earthquake was to the Chief Logistics Officer of Civil Defence about using a helicopter to carry supplies to Christchurch. The officer told me we could do it, but Civil Defence didn't officially support us, and he wished us good luck.
That day, hot Rangiora fish and chips were being dropped in Wainoni Park. Laura also London Street, Hamilton.
Working with the City Council has shown me that there are rules and regulation you never dreamed would be on your side, but they are more on the side of what the black and white paperwork says. It was incredibly frustrating and unsupportive.
Women talked about networking with others to provide assistance or how they received help. Of course, many spoke of both, like Nippy, who signed up for some Red Cross support. Eventually, the army arrived and asked if they could help her. She asked them to fix her front door so it would close properly.
The Kiwi boys couldn't fix it. The guys from the Philippines had it fixed in about 5 minutes. The local church was offering breakfast and lunch, and me and my neighbours popped over there for coffee sometimes.
But Nippy was also active in helping out other members of the elderly neighbours. She knocked down the fence so that her elderly neighbour next door could come over. She also helped the old boy around the corner and another neighbour in her 90s. The water was delivered to the local church. But who was to get it from the church to the elderly? Good neighbours. Who else? There was significant unevenness for participants in accessing and receiving information, help and or assistance.
We'd been doing it in a bucket. We used the shed. We cut up a plastic picnic chair and had the bucket inside, and inside that was a plastic bag. Other streets had got portaloos at this stage. There were no portaloos in our street at all. We kept ringing up to ask when we were going to get a portaloo, and then we thought we'd drive around and see if other streets like this. We saw that every house in some streets had a portaloo, and then we realised we were going to be the last on the list.
Women were at the forefront of both delivering and receiving help, whether in neighbourhoods or on a larger scale, whether carving roast meals at the back of a ute or coordinating thousands of students to dig liquefaction. Women, young and old, were there in numbers. The next topic to be discussed is a crucial one, that of housing.
Our project found that people from all walks of life and all over the city have had housing issues since the quake. Whether they're renting, owning their own home, in a retirement village like NCW, Dame Grace Hollander, or in council or state housing. After being engulfed by liquefaction in her Woolston rental, Gina and her family went to stay with her mother in Bromley on 22nd February. The family moved into her mother's garage. She went back a week later when the flooding had receded in her street.
My landlord was there and he said, right, you need to sign this and get your bond back. Then he started cleaning the house out and I said, hey, that's my stuff. I'm still living here. The next day I was on the phone to the Tenancy Tribunal people. On the 3rd of March I returned to find my house absolutely empty.
Gina has still not received her bond money and noticed a few weeks later that the very damaged house that she had left had been relet. Dee Turner, who's over 80, was in council housing in Sumner. When the flats were red-stickered, she went into
a sort of limbo. Eventually, I was offered an upstairs flat in Papanui. At first, I was lonely and felt like an eagle in an eagle's nest. But now I'm grateful to be warm and safe. I think I'm much better off than families in New Brighton who are still living in cold, damp, horrible conditions.
Emily lives with her granddaughter in Housing New Zealand accommodation near Wainoni Park.
The whole area is owned by Housing New Zealand, and they have started pulling down houses all over here. Those two storied ones are going, and the ones across the street are going. But they haven't told us what's happening to us yet. Nobody's been around for the last 2 years, actually.
Caroline owns her own home in New Brighton. It's a skyline cottage that she built on a back section. She's experienced liquefaction, flooding, craters of water in her garden, damage to her home. It was recently assessed as over the cap after endless negotiations with Fletcher's EQR and her insurance company.
I feel like I've been trapped here. I don't want to live here. I just want to get on with other things. I am very, very angry about how the place is being run, especially the delays and the lack of professionalism.
Most of the participants in this study had stories to tell of economic loss, loss of community, sadness, loneliness, and long, long waits for repairs, rebuilds, or payouts. Common themes included black mould, living in one room as others were uninhabitable, poor quality housing, but also of the kindness of strangers and those who were close to them. The final area we've chosen to outline today is the crucial one of water.
Can't live with it, can't live without it. These are our main themes for the many stories we were told about water. Many people in the eastern suburbs lost water for long periods of time and had to make do as best they could. Several clever people turned off their cylinders and drained the water into the bath. Others relied on delivered water like Marie Reen.
Every day, a guy from Rangiora came down to the end of Rocking Horse Road with a water tanker every day at 12 o'clock. He was a typical Kiwi bloke and he was marvellous. He was kind of our lifeline with this lovely fresh water every day.
Helen King, aged 92, had both power and water and had visits from her son's mother-in-law and family for showers.
They took a lot of water away because I had no trouble with water. Another neighbour came with her children. They lived in another area and she gave her 2 boys and they had showers.
2 of our participants had access to water, working artesian source, and didn't have to stand in line for water tankers. For Michelle, a New Brighton resident, it took 10 days for a man to stop with a truck at the end of the driveway. He had a van full of water and asked her if they needed any. She said that they did and asked why he had not been there before. He said the street did not look as though there was any damage.
It was so good to get fresh water. The man also provided some lollies to my son. He was rapt.
We heard many stories of too much water. Many of the women, like Alia, could not get home after the February quake because
the street where I live was just filled with water.
Several residents in Kaiapoi were inundated after the September earthquake. As the term liquefaction first entered the vocabulary of Christchurch residents.
The next thing, the water started coming through the floor, the concrete floor. So we were running around like idiots, trying to lift everything up off the floor. And the next thing, it was up to our ankles.
That's all we have time to tell you today. That just scratches the surface of some of these stories and some of the links that can be made between them. Our stories of more than 100 Christchurch women's experience of the quakes will live on via websites, particularly the UC Seismic website, audio recordings, videos, photographs, and hopefully in a legacy of policy improvements in disaster management. Our reports cover a much wider range of issues than we've been able to look at today. They include women's hopes for the future, Christchurch buildings, the vexed question of Christchurch Cathedral, long waits, infrastructure problems, and so on. Perhaps in this den of democratic politics, we can leave you with the words of an Aranui resident, Emily, who said,
"I won't vote for somebody that doesn't even know you're here. They won't even come in their cars to see you. See how your houses are, or see how your street is, or even bother to go to the schools to see how the schools are coping. I'm only interested in people that actually come here."
To conclude, we would like to thank you for your grant. It made possible our very first work on this project. Thank you for your time, your attention, and we wish you well in your and our continued struggles to rebuild the city. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll declare my interest. So my photograph is there at the bottom of the picture. So I was one of the ones interviewed, and actually I know some of the women that you've interviewed, obviously, and you've chosen some of the stories that I was very familiar with, representing the East at the time. But I kind of wanted to try and tease out why it is important to have this information or the women's stories. Because for me, there was a moment where I opened the paper and it had all of the leaders speaking about the recovery of Christchurch, and they were all men. You know, and it was just on this particular occasion. It was there was not one single woman's voice. So what I want to tease out is, why is it important to have women's voices? You know, when those who are leaders in a city can represent, why is it important that women's voices come through as well? What is it about their stories that perhaps differentiate the experience of others, and their contribution to what we need to learn and understand from, so that we can actually do a better job in the future?
Most of the people you'd have before this committee are men. They're people who are developers. They're people doing a lot of other things. But women hold up half the sky, and they have their own experiences. They were often the people who went round looking for the families after the earthquakes, who had to negotiate the roads to get their kids to schools in all sorts of areas of the city. You know, women had different experiences, and certainly the literature on disaster management emphasises the different experiences that women had to men. And of course, we've had the opportunity now to document some of those differences. Some of them are exactly the same, you know, but there's a different focus in many areas. We do have women in our study who were involved in pulling people out from various buildings after the earthquakes. Women were involved everywhere, but one particular domain they're involved in was the home, the family, the children, and those things that they tend to take responsibility for. And as you can tell, they've got some great stories to tell, and so that's another really good reason.
Yeah. I think the other thing that is quite unique about our stories, when you read the whole stories on the website, is that even people who are in positions of decision-making, who were working with dogs to try and find people in wrecked buildings after the quake, people who are heritage experts, people who've been responsible for looking after our taonga or treasures in the city, they all have their personal stories as well. And it's not often you can go to one place where you can find the stories of people's involvement in their community, their attempts to contribute, whether it's the level of their elderly 90-year-old neighbour getting water for them in the period after the quake, or whether it is actually making crucial decisions or getting large amounts of food from Rangiora into New Brighton and Wainoni. They all have an element. And Men have those stories as well, but they're often less prepared to tell them. And it's very important for our thinking about the quake to have an understanding of the big things, the community things, the connection things, and what got done in that period of immediate response. But it's also important to know the people who did it as people, and to see the intersection between people's public lives, their community and neighbourhood lives, their family lives, and other aspects of their life. You can read that if you go to our stories.
Yeah. Ellie.
Thank you very much. I have to say that took me back to listening to Under Milk Wood by Dylan Thomas, and I wonder whether you might be doing something audio-wise, with those stories, because I think it would be lovely to listen to. I have to declare too, I've worked with the College of Midwives for the last 12 years, and I have to say that I think what the midwives did with women, both pregnant and newborns, over those immediate days was quite sensational, and they didn't skip a beat when it came to the care of women. But I've heard too from several people working with people still struggling with the aftermath, primarily EQC and insurance issues. And in fact, there's news today that the number of children who are still dealing with this and seeking support and psychological help is growing. I wonder whether, many women who are still managing the stress and taking on those fights. In the studies and the conversations you had with women, anecdotally or actually factually, did you see an indication that it is the woman perhaps in a relationship who is picking up that stressful part of the aftermath? It's not a competition, but men are working, men are perhaps more involved in the development and on the ground rebuild stuff. Was that something that came through? And if it did, how does that then affect the family unit and the relationship that they have with their partner?
In terms of answering that, remember we've spoken only to women. There are other oral history projects which talk to men as well, and some of those look at some of the emotional impacts on men and what they do to keep their families going. But we've interviewed a whole series of women, particularly women who are on benefits, women who are in the lowest incomes in the city, are often women who are the sole adults in their households. So they have assumed a huge amount of responsibility over this period of time. And we think it's important to document that. I think you would find in our stories, and we hope that we'll be able to show this when we put together our overall report and do some more detailed analysis, that the things that the City Council and other agencies do in terms of community building, in terms of neighbourhood support, in terms of community development are absolutely crucial as well, because we have stories of the women who were the most heavily pressed with respect to the responsibilities in their family, who would mention in very positive terms actions of social workers, people involved in NGOs, various organisations have been absolutely crucial for seeing them through the very worst times. But there are also situations where there are women living in totally inadequate housing and find it very difficult to find anything else. There are women who are attempting desperately to maintain their paid work and be on working for families rather than go back on the benefit. And they're doing that under extraordinarily physically difficult conditions in terms of care of their children. And those children are often in the parts of the city that have been most affected by the quake, whose schooling has been most disrupted, and have least facilities available to them in terms of activities that can be part of their development as people in the city.
Thank you. I'm afraid that's the 20 minutes. So, look, I really appreciate the time that you've put into this, the effort that you've undertaken, and the presentation that you've made today. I think it's been very compelling, and we appreciate, really the opportunity you've given us to see, what a grant has actually been an investment in an incredible resource that will go on producing, I think, a lot of quality information as we learn what the lessons are from the experience that we've had, in order that we can prepare others in the future for similar experiences, but also share that knowledge with the world. So thank you very, very, very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time. Thank you.
So could I call on Ross Gray?